The pen felt heavier than it should have. Lyra Ashton stared at the signature line on the divorce papers. Her name printed below her husband's in clean, professional font, as if the end of 8 years could be reduced to a font choice and a dotted line. Her lawyer had said something. She nodded without hearing it. Outside the window, Toronto's November sky sat low and gray, the kind of gray that didn't threaten anything, just settled in and stayed. She signed. Her hand didn't shake. She was almost disappointed by that. 8 years earlier, Lyra had been 29 years old, teaching urban planning at Ryerson, still buying her groceries at the No Frills on Bloor, and genuinely convinced that the man across the table at her friend's dinner party, the one who kept refilling her wine without being asked, was interesting, not wealthy. Interesting. His name was Brendan Hollister. She learned he ran a development firm 3 months in when it came up almost by accident. By then she was already lost. Brendan had a way of making you feel like the room contracted around the two of you. He listened with his full face. He remembered things. Her mother's name, the conference she'd been nervous about, the street she'd grown up on in Sudbury. He made her feel, for the first time in her adult life, like being fully seen was safe. They married in a small ceremony in Prince Edward County, wildflowers on every table, her sister crying before the vows even started. What Lyra didn't know, what she couldn't have known, because Brendan had been very careful, was that by the time he proposed, he had already decided she was a liability he would eventually have to manage. The first crack appeared in year 3. She had wanted children. They had talked about it before the wedding in that earnest pre-marriage way where everything feels hypothetical and romantic. He'd said he wanted them too. A couple, maybe. He'd even said he liked the idea of a girl first. In year 3, he started finding reasons to wait. His company was in a growth phase. Her contract was up for renewal. The condo wasn't big enough. Each reason was sensible on its own. Together they built a wall she didn't see until she was already standing on the wrong side of it. She saw a specialist in year 5. The results were fine. Everything was fine on her end. When she brought up the idea of Brendan getting tested too, he went quiet in a way she had learned to read as a door closing. "I just don't think now is the time," he said. She let it go. She got very good at letting things go. In year 6, she found a receipt in his coat pocket. Not for anything obvious, just dinner at a restaurant she'd never heard of, for 2. On a Tuesday night he'd told her he was in Ottawa for work. She stood in their kitchen on Rosedale Valley Road, holding that small slip of paper, and felt something shift in her chest. Not break, just tilt, like a picture knocked slightly off center. She told herself there was probably an explanation. She was almost right. The woman's name was Skye Marchetti. Lyra found out the way women usually find out. Not through confrontation, not through a dramatic revelation, but through an accumulation of small things that eventually reached critical mass. A name that appeared too often, a change in the pattern of his evenings. The specific way he started looking at his phone when she entered a room. When she finally asked him directly, in February of their 8th year, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea going cold between them, Brendan didn't deny it. He sat back in his chair and folded his hands and said, "I think we both know this hasn't been working for a long time." As if it were a business arrangement that had run its course. As if 8 years were a lease. She didn't cry in front of him. She waited until he left the room, and then she sat very still, looking at the steam rising off her tea, and she thought, "I gave you the decade I was supposed to give myself." The divorce proceedings took 4 months. Brendan's lawyers were aggressive in the precise, bloodless way that expensive lawyers are. They moved quickly, buried her side in paperwork, and made clear, without ever saying so directly, that Brendan intended to walk away with the house, primary interest in the Rosedale property portfolio, and his firm's holding company intact. Lyra's lawyer, a thorough woman named Patricia Ossie, who wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the calm of someone who had seen everything, read through the settlement documents twice before she said anything. "There's a clause here," Patricia said. It was buried in Schedule F of the Asset Division Agreement. A single paragraph formatted like a routine disclosure, stipulating that Lyra would receive a structured settlement in lieu of any claim on Hollister Development's residential portfolio. The clause was worded carefully, legally sound, almost undetectable if you weren't looking for it. It effectively signed away her claim to the properties she had helped identify, consult on, and in 2 cases personally negotiated the community approval for during her time as a planner. "He knew you'd focus on the condo and the savings accounts," Patricia said. "This was designed to slip through." Lyra looked at the clause for a long time. "Did my signature appear anywhere on the original portfolio filings?" she asked. Patricia looked at her over the reading glasses. "You want to fight this? I want to understand what I'm signing." They were sitting in Patricia's office on Bay Street, 23rd floor. Late afternoon light cutting long rectangles across the carpet. Outside, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. Lyra had the sensation, not for the first time, of watching her own life from slightly outside it. She signed the divorce papers 2 days later. Not the asset clause. Patricia had flagged it for dispute. But the divorce itself. She signed it because she needed it to be over, because she could not carry the weight of being still married to a man who had filed her away like a memo he no longer needed. The pen was heavy. She signed anyway. She didn't know she was pregnant until 6 weeks later. She was at her sister Daphne's house in Hamilton, helping paint the nursery. Daphne was 8 months along with her first, and Lyra had climbed down from the stepladder to take a break, and suddenly the room pitched sideways. She sat on the floor. Daphne crouched beside her, paint roller in hand, and looked at her with the kind of knowing that older sisters sometimes arrive at before you do. "When did you last eat?" Daphne asked. "This morning," Lyra said. And then, I think, the test was positive. Lyra sat on the edge of Daphne's bathtub for a long time. The wallpaper in there was pale yellow, little sprigs of something botanical repeating endlessly. She stared at it. She thought about the specialist she'd seen 3 years ago. She thought about Brendan's reluctance, the reasons that kept accumulating, the way he'd gone quiet when she mentioned him being tested. She thought, he knew. She didn't have proof yet. But she thought it. The fertility specialist she saw the following week was direct. "There were indications," she said carefully, "that Brendan may have been receiving testosterone supplementation. A common practice in certain wellness clinics, often for performance or appearance, but one that significantly suppresses sperm production. If it had been ongoing, it would explain the difficulty conceiving. It was not something that would show up in standard blood work unless you were specifically looking for it. It would not have been accidental." Lyra drove home on the 403 in silence, both hands on the wheel, the radio off. The November trees along the highway were stripped bare. She felt something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. It was more like the sensation of a floor giving way beneath her, slow and then all at once. He had taken that from her, too. All those years of waiting, all those specialists, all the time she had told herself to be patient, to trust him, to believe the timing was just never right. He had manufactured every single one of those years. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "It's okay," she said to no one. To someone. She did not contact Brendan. Patricia advised her against it for the moment. They were still in the middle of the asset dispute, and anything Lyra said could be used to muddy the proceedings. Lyra agreed. She moved into a sublet in the annex, 2 rooms above a bakery, the kind of apartment where you could hear every word the neighbors said through the walls. She found it comforting. Evidence of other lives. She taught her seminars, attended her department meetings, ate toast for dinner more often than she would admit to Daphne. She started showing in January and stopped telling herself she'd figure it out later. The person who forced that reckoning was not who she expected. His name was Fletcher Drummond. She had met him twice before, once at a planning symposium at the ROM, once at a benefit dinner for the Waterfront Revitalization Project. He ran an infrastructure investment firm based in Ottawa and was, by most credible accounts, the kind of person who made decisions that reshaped cities without appearing in newspapers. Private, methodical, allergic to sentiment. He called her in January, which surprised her. He said he'd heard she was advising on the new Portland's development framework. He asked if she'd be willing to consult on a transit. His firm was evaluate Shiva's proposal. She nearly said no. She was tired. She was pregnant. She was in the middle of rebuilding her entire life from scratch. She said yes, because she recognized, somewhere in the fog of that winter, that if she stopped moving, she might not start again. Fletcher was not what she had expected close up. He was quieter than his reputation suggested. He listened carefully and said less than most people in rooms that size. He asked her questions about land use and community impact that told her he had actually read the existing literature, not just the summary. He didn't ask about Brendan, even though she suspected he knew. He didn't offer sympathy or careful looks. He treated her like a professional, after months of being treated by lawyers and mediators and well-meaning friends. Like a woman in the middle of a crisis, the effect was almost startling. They had 3 working sessions before he said anything personal. It was the last one, at a coffee shop on Elgin Street in Ottawa, February, both of them reviewing a community consultation report. He looked up from the document and said simply, "How are you actually doing?" Not a question. More like an acknowledgement that there was a real answer she might not have given anyone lately. She thought about deflecting. She was good at deflecting. "I'm angry," she said instead. "I think I've been angry for years and I kept talking myself out of it." He nodded. Like that made sense. Like it was the correct response to a reasonable situation. "That seems right," he said, and went back to the document. She found herself thinking about that exchange for days afterwards. The asset dispute resolved in April. Patricia had found enough inconsistencies in the Schedule F clause, cross-referenced against Lyra's documented contributions to 3 of the Hollister portfolio properties, to bring a formal challenge. Brendan's lawyers pushed back. There were 3 weeks of tense negotiation that Lyra mostly experienced through forwarded emails, and Patricia's increasingly clipped summaries. In the end, Brendan settled. He agreed to a revised financial settlement, significantly more than the original offer, and waived the Schedule F clause. Patricia told Lyra over the phone in the same tone she used for everything, and Lyra sat at her little kitchen table above the bakery and breathed for the first time in what felt like months. "What changed?" Lyra asked. "He didn't want discovery," Patricia said. "Once we indicated we were prepared to subpoena the clinic records, he wanted it finished." The clinic records, the testosterone supplementation, the years of manufactured waiting. He had been afraid of what the evidence would show, and so he had settled rather than face it. Lyra thought about all the apologies he had never given her. She thought about the way he had sat across from her at that kitchen table and said, "This hasn't been working," as if she had failed to maintain something, as if it were her fault the floor had never been level. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt something quieter than that, a long exhale, the kind that comes at the end of something you didn't realize you'd been holding. She went into labor early on a Tuesday morning in May. Daphne drove her to Mount Sinai, too fast, running a yellow on University Avenue, narrating every traffic light, with an anxiety that somehow made Lyra calmer by contrast. The delivery was not easy. It was not the composed, candlelit experience that certain books had suggested it might be. It was loud and exhausting, and at several points, Lyra said things she later chose not to remember. Twin girls, both healthy, both furious at the interruption. Lyra held them in the recovery room, one in each arm, in the gray-blue hour before the city fully woke. Daphne had fallen asleep in the chair by the window. A nurse moved quietly near the door. Everything was very still. She looked at her daughters for a long time. They had her hands, the long fingers, the wide palms. She noticed that first. She had not cried much during the divorce. She had not cried at the lawyer's office, or when she signed, or when she drove away from the Rosedale house for the last time, with 2 suitcases and a box of books. She had kept herself very contained because she had needed to. She cried now, quietly, so as not to wake Daphne. She pressed her lips to the forehead of the baby on her left, then the baby on her right, and she thought, this is what was waiting. This is what all of it was waiting for. Brendan found out through a mutual contact 3 weeks later. Lyra had not told him. She had thought about it, weighed it as a legal and moral question, talked it through with Patricia, and they had agreed that, given the clinic evidence and the asset dispute, she had grounds to restrict contact while the support arrangement was formalized. Brendan had no standing to demand access until a parenting agreement was in place. When he tried to reach her directly, first by text, then through his own lawyer, Patricia intercepted. The messages were not warm. Brendan had apparently expected her to inform him, to involve him, to manage his feelings about a situation his own choices had created. He filed a motion for emergency parenting access. Patricia filed the clinic records in response. The judge reviewed the materials and denied the emergency motion. She noted, in her brief decision, that the circumstances warranted a full parenting assessment before any access schedule was determined. She used the phrase deliberate interference with reproductive autonomy once, and only once, but she used it clearly. Lyra read the decision in Patricia's office and did not say anything for a moment. "He didn't know that would be in there," Patricia said. "No," Lyra agreed. "He thought it would be about the divorce. It's about more than the divorce now." Fletcher heard what had happened, not from Lyra, but from someone who had been at the Mount Sinai waiting room, some interconnected professional acquaintance from the planning world. He sent a text that said only, "I heard. I'm glad you're both well. Both of them, I mean." She read it 3 times. She wrote back, "Both of them would be 2. There are 2. He responded with a pause long enough that she thought she'd startled him. Then, "I didn't know that. Congratulations twice over." She found herself smiling, which surprised her. She hadn't expected to smile for a while. He called the following week, properly, not just a text, and asked if she needed anything. She said she needed sleep and someone to bring her coffee without making it into a whole thing. He laughed. It was a shorter laugh than she expected, genuine in a way that felt unguarded. He showed up the following Saturday with coffee and a bag of pastries from a Moroccan bakery in Centertown that she had never heard of, and he sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours while her daughters slept in the next room, and they talked about the Portland's project, about the planning framework she was thinking of publishing, about the city as a system, about how systems fail. He didn't make it about her situation. He didn't make it about himself. He just showed up with coffee, without making it into a whole thing. She noticed. The parenting assessment took 8 months. Brendan hired an expert of his own and contested the clinic record's admissibility. His lawyers argued relevance. Patricia argued pattern. The process was slow and expensive and emotionally corrosive in the particular way that legal proceedings involving children always are. Lyra taught her seminars and fed her daughters at 3 in the morning and graded papers on her phone during nap times. And somewhere in all of it, published the planning framework paper that got picked up by 2 university departments in Vancouver and 1 in Halifax. She was not fine. She was also not falling apart. There's a version of this story where she fell apart. She was aware of that version. She refused it. The assessment concluded in the spring of the following year. The assessor recommended supervised access only, noting Brendan's pattern of unilateral decision-making within the marriage regarding family planning, inconsistent with the parenting values he expressed during interview. The clinic records were admitted. The judge set a supervised access schedule with a review date 18 months out. Brendan did not get what he came for. Lyra sat outside the courtroom on a wooden bench, her coat still on, her bag in her lap, and looked at the hallway's long fluorescent light. It was a very ordinary hallway, the kind you forget the moment you leave. Patricia sat beside her. "That's as good as it gets," she said. "I know. How are you feeling?" Lyra thought about it honestly. "Like someone let go of something very heavy, and I'm waiting to feel my arms again." Patricia made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Give it time." Fletcher took her to dinner in June. He was direct about it, which she appreciated. Not a working meal, not a consulting session, just dinner if she wanted. She got a babysitter. She wore a dress she hadn't worn since before everything. She met him at a small restaurant on Cumberland Street in Toronto, the kind of place that doesn't have much signage and books up 3 weeks out. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she came in. She had spent a year being processed by systems. Courts, clinics, legal procedures, mediation sessions. She had become very efficient at being appraised. Fletcher looked at her like she was a person he was glad to see. Just that, nothing complicated in it. They ate for 3 hours. They talked about her daughters' names. Remy and Soleil, both chosen the night before she left the hospital. Both names she had been saving for years without knowing why. He said Soleil was unusual, and she said she'd always liked names that meant something about light. He said that tracked, based on what he'd observed. She asked him what he'd observed, and he said, "You default to clarity, even when it costs you." She thought about that for the rest of the night. Brendan called her directly in August, bypassing his lawyer. She answered because she didn't recognize the number. His voice sounded different, flatter, less shaped by the particular confidence she had spent years accommodating. I wanted to talk to you without them in the room, he said. There's a reason they're in the room, Brendan. I know that. I know. A pause. I made mistakes. She waited. I should have been honest with you. About a lot of things. She let the silence sit. She had learned over the past 18 months that she didn't owe anyone a response just because they'd stopped talking. I want to be in their lives, he said finally. Properly. I know I have no right to ask you. You have a schedule, she said. Use it. Show up consistently. That's what being in their lives looks like. He started to say something else. She said goodbye, gently but clearly, and ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she went back into the living room, where Remy was trying to climb the arm of the sofa, and Soleil was watching her with the patient, evaluative look she had apparently been born with. Come here, Lyra said, and scooped Remy off the sofa arm before she made it over the top. Remy shrieked with outrage and delight. Soleil observed. Lyra thought, this is the life, not the one I planned, this exact one. The paper she published that fall was cited 7 times by the end of the year. Her department offered her a tenured position in January. Fletcher's firm completed the Portland's consultation, with her framework embedded in the final proposal. The first time she'd seen her own thinking reflected back in a city plan. She stood at the waterfront on a Thursday afternoon, in February, collar up against the lake wind, looking at the construction site that would eventually be 600 units of mixed-income housing, on land that had been empty for 40 years. She thought about systems, how they calcify, how sometimes the only way forward is through a breach. Fletcher came up beside her. He didn't announce himself. She had stopped being surprised by his arrivals. Cold, he said. Yep. They stood there for a moment, the lake gray and restless behind the hoarding boards. I've been thinking, he said, about whether I should keep pretending the dinners are about the project. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the construction site. They're not, he said. I think you know they're not. I wanted to say it out loud. She was quiet for a moment. The wind came off the water, and she pulled her collar up further. I know, she said. And I'm not ready for something easy, she said. I'm not sure easy is what I am anymore. He was quiet, unhurried the way he always was. I don't need easy, he said. I need honest. She looked at him then, really looked, the way you look at something you've been being careful about for a long time. He met it without flinching. Then give me a little time, she said. You have it. Spring came late that year, the way it often does in Ontario. March still locked in, April bargaining, May arriving finally with the force of something that had been waiting a long time. Remy learned to walk in April. Soleil had been walking for 3 weeks already and watched her sister's first independent steps with an expression of measured approval. Lyra filmed it on her phone. She sent the video to Daphne, to her mother in Sudbury, to Patricia, and, after a moment, to Fletcher. He wrote back, "Look at her go." She looked at that message for a moment. Something in it, the simplicity, the warmth, the completeness of it, made her feel the future as a place she wanted to be in. She wrote back, "Come for dinner Sunday. Bring the good coffee." His response came in about 4 seconds. "I'll be there." The legal side took another year to fully resolve. The clinic records were eventually part of a civil case that Lyra filed separately, on the advice of a women's health advocacy clinic in Toronto, against the physician who had prescribed the supplementation without discussion or disclosure of its impact on fertility. That case settled out of court. The physician's licensing board opened a review. Lyra did not attend the settlement. She was in Hamilton, watching Remy chase Daphne's toddler around the backyard, both of them shrieking at a frequency that required a moment of quiet afterwards. She sat on Daphne's porch steps with a cup of tea. Daphne sat beside her. "How do you thought about it?" "Like I'm on the other side of something." "Good other side or bad other side?" "Good," Lyra said. "The kind where you can finally look back without it pulling you." Daphne leaned her head on Lyra's shoulder. They watched the children. The afternoon was warm. The kind of warm that Ontario holds briefly and perfectly before it tips into summer's heat. "You know," Daphne said, "I always thought you were too patient with him. I know, you kept giving him time. I know that too. But the girls are the time," Lyra said. All of it just became them. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then she squeezed Lyra's arm. Inside the house, Soleil had apparently decided the chase game was beneath her and was now sitting in the middle of the kitchen, thoroughly examining a wooden spoon, with the focused expression of someone who intended to understand it completely before moving on. Lyra watched her through the screen door and felt something she had almost forgotten the shape of. Not relief, not arrival. Something more like the quiet, specific joy of recognizing that right here, this afternoon, these children, this porch, this tea, was not the consolation prize. It was the thing. It had always been going to be the thing.